A 180-pound retired police dog was surrendered to a shelter at 7 years old. 4 months later, a stranger took him home, and then every single night, he disappeared into the dark streets of Nashville. For 11 weeks, nobody knew where he went until the police called. The call came at 6:23 in the morning. James had been awake for 2 hours already, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty dog bed in the corner. Cerberus was gone again. Third time this week, and this time James hadn't slept at all. When his phone buzzed, he almost knocked his coffee over grabbing it. "Sir, this is Officer Miller from Nashville PD. We have your dog here at the station. Can you come in?" James didn't even ask how. He grabbed his keys. But this story doesn't start at a police station. It starts 6 months earlier in a shelter on the east side of Nashville, where a 180-pound black cane corso sat alone in the back kennel and watched the door like he was waiting for something that was never going to come. His name was Cerberus, and he had already lived 2 lives before James ever found him. For 6 years, Cerberus worked with Nashville's K9 unit. His handler, Officer Dave Reyes, called him the best dog he'd ever worked with. Not the fastest, not the loudest, but the most focused. Cerberus didn't get distracted. Cerberus didn't quit. When he locked onto a trail, he followed it until there was nowhere left to go. Then came the night everything changed. A routine search operation in a warehouse district. A suspect bolted. Cerberus went after him and took a piece of rebar directly to his left shoulder. The injury healed, but his speed never fully came back. At 7 years old, the department made their decision. Cerberus was retired from active duty. 3 weeks later, he was surrendered to the shelter. The intake form said, "Good dog, just too intense for a normal home." For 4 months, Cerberus sat in that back kennel. Families came through. Kids pressed their faces against the bars of the friendly dogs up front. Nobody walked to the back. Nobody wanted a 7-year-old, 180-pound cane corso with a scar on his shoulder and eyes that looked straight through you. Nobody except James. James Whitfield was 58 years old, recently retired, recently divorced, recently moved to a smaller house on the outskirts of Nashville. He hadn't planned on getting a dog. He'd gone to the shelter to donate some old blankets, but something made him walk to the back. Cerberus looked at him, not the way the other dogs looked at people, desperate and hopeful. He just looked, steady, calm, like he was deciding something. James stood there for a long moment. "I'll take him," he told the shelter worker. The worker paused. He was a canine dog. He's not really a pet. "I know, I'm not really looking for a pet." The first 2 weeks were quiet. Cerberus didn't beg for attention, didn't destroy furniture, didn't bark. He patrolled the house at night, checked every room, then settled by the front door like a soldier standing post. James let him be. He understood something about needing a purpose. Then the disappearances started. The first night, James woke up at 2:47 a.m. and found the back door open. Not broken, open. Cerberus had learned the handle. James drove around the neighborhood for an hour. Nothing. At 5:30 a.m., he heard heavy paws on the porch. Cerberus walked in, drank an entire bowl of water, and collapsed on his bed. Exhausted but unharmed. James told himself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. Night after night, Cerberus disappeared somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. and returned before sunrise looking like he'd run a marathon. James tried everything. He installed extra locks. Cerberus figured them out. He tried a leash tied to the radiator. Cerberus pulled it free. He tried staying awake to follow him, but the moment James reached for his jacket, Cerberus would sit down and refuse to move until James gave up and went back inside. I see you still haven't subscribed. Honestly, that breaks my heart. Hit that subscribe button right now because what James found at that police station will change everything you think you know about loyalty. James lost 3 weeks of sleep trying to solve the mystery. He checked Cerberus for injuries every morning, nothing serious. A scratch here, mud on his paws, once what looked like someone else's dried blood on his chest that turned out to be red clay from the riverbank. Whatever Cerberus was doing out there, it wasn't getting him killed, but it was eating James alive. And then Officer Miller called. James walked into Nashville PD at 7:15 a.m., still wearing his pajama shirt. Cerberus was sitting in the corner of the front office, perfectly calm like he owned the place. Around him, 3 officers stood in a loose circle, staring. "Mr. Wilfield," Officer Miller said slowly, "do you know what your dog has been doing?" James shook his head. Miller turned a laptop around, security camera footage, greeny, time-stamped. And there was Cerberus, moving through the dark streets of Nashville like a ghost, and beside him an elderly woman, moving slowly, holding onto his back for balance. Cerberus walked her straight to the station entrance, waited until an officer came out, then turned and disappeared back into the dark. Miller clicked to another clip, a teenage boy sitting on a curb at 2 a.m., head in his hands. Cerberus approached him slowly, sat beside him, and stayed for 40 minutes, until the boy stood up and followed him, all the way to the station door. Another clip, a man in his 60s, disoriented, wandering near the river, Cerberus circling him gently, nudging him away from the water's edge, guiding him toward lights and safety. 7 people, Miller said quietly, in 11 weeks. He's brought us 7 people. James couldn't speak. That's when the door behind him opened. "I heard you had a Cane Corso in here." The voice stopped. "No, it can't be." Officer Dave Reyes stood in the doorway, staring at Cerberus, his former partner, the dog he'd trained, worked alongside, and watched get loaded into a shelter van 4 months ago. Cerberus stood up slowly, walked to Dave, and pressed his massive head against the man's chest. Dave dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the station, his hand shaking as he buried it in Cerberus's black coat. "We trained him," Dave said, his voice cracking, "to never leave a person behind." He looked up at James. Guess nobody told him he was retired. James drove home with Cerberus in the passenger seat. The dog stared out the window the whole way, watching the streets pass. That night, James didn't lock the back door. Because some dogs don't stop serving just because someone stopped asking them to. Some dogs carry their purpose so deep in their bones that no amount of retirement, no shelter kennel, no quiet house on the edge of town can pull it out of them. Cerberus wasn't lost those nights. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. If this story hit you somewhere deep, subscribe right now and drop a comment below. Would you have trusted Cerberus, or would his intensity have scared you away? Tell me in the comments.